I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day, 2008, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Santa Claus passing my house in Bloomington, Indiana. The day started in typical fashion, with the opening of gifts around the Christmas tree. I served an early Christmas dinner for family and friends, and everybody had departed by 5 p.m. except my sister and brother-in-law who lived with me. They were sleeping in a bedroom at the end of the hall, with the door open. I went into my bedroom with my dog Toby and shut the door securely. Toby curled up on the foot of my bed like he always does. It was chilly, so I pulled the blankets and comforter up around my head and curled up to nap for about an hour. I was just dozing off when I heard the latch on my bedroom door open. I waited several seconds for my sister or brother-in-law to ask me whatever they came to say, but there was no other sound. It was almost 7 p.m., so my bedroom was pitch black. I had left lights on in the kitchen and the bathroom, and there were lots of Christmas lights in the living room, so the hallway should have been well lit. I would be able to see whoever was at the door just by lifting my head. I pushed the blankets down and lifted my head from the pillow, but just as I would have been able to see who was in the doorway, an extremely bright light hit me right in the eyes. I shielded my eyes and yelled, "Turn out that fucking light, you're blinding me!" The light immediately disappeared, and I heard the bedroom door latch close. My bedside lamp is a touch lamp, so I tapped on it and looked around the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom except me and Toby. Toby jumped off of the bed and went to the door without showing any signs of alarm. At first I wasn't afraid because Toby is a Dutch Shepherd, well trained to be an excellent watchdog and proven personal protection dog. Since Toby was already up, I decided to go and let him outside and see what sis or brother-in-law needed. When I went into the hallway, I could see both of them still in their beds. I took Toby into the living room and let him outside. There was nobody out there either. So, who had opened my bedroom door and turned the spotlight on my face? Ordinarily, I'm not a skittish person, and strange noises or lights wouldn't alarm me, but this situation was just too eerie, and the light had made my skin crawl. Let me add that the latch on my bedroom door is broken in such a way that the inside door handle must be jiggled for the latch to pop out and engage. It makes a very distinctive sound that I'm used to listening for, because if it doesn't latch, the door swings open. I'm absolutely positive that the door was latched closed when I got into bed, just as I'm certain it was the door latch I heard during the incident. When I left the bedroom, the door latch was closed again. I couldn't understand how my sister or brother-in-law could have come into my room and then returned to their own bed and crawled under the covers in the few seconds that it took me to reach the hallway. But I figured it had to be one of them, since Toby always barks and growls at everybody and everything that he doesn't immediately recognize. When brother-in-law got up to get ready for work that night, I asked him what he wanted earlier in the evening when he had opened my door. He just looked puzzled and said, "I never got up, and I certainly never opened your door. I slept soundly the whole time I was in bed." Okay. I then asked Sis, "Did you want something earlier this morning when you opened my door?" She looked puzzled and just said, "I dozed off and on, but I never got out of bed and I never saw or heard anything in the hallway." She leaves their bedroom door open at all times and she faces the hallway so she can see whoever's coming and going throughout the house. So, who was my special Christmas visitor? And how did they get in and out so quickly? Like most people, the thoughts of loved ones are always close at hand during the holiday season. When I first went to lie down, I was thinking how happy I was that my small family enjoyed a pleasant Christmas. But it would have been so much better if my mother or brother had been alive to share it with us. I would like to think that it was my brother's spirit stopping by to say, "Merry Christmas, I still think of you too." I haven't been able to debunk this strange event or find any kind of rational explanation. I'm half afraid that my heart stopped during my sleep, and the light I saw was the bright light people report after a near-death experience. Leave it to me to see the stairway to heaven and ruin my chance at eternal paradise by saying, "Turn out that fucking light." I've made a mental note that if I ever see another bright light, to clean up my language just in case. It was Christmas time of 1995 or 96 at my aunt's house on a reservation in North Dakota. Some of my family was in the living room watching television, and the kids were playing in their rooms or sleeping. My uncle and aunt and I were sitting beside the table putting a puzzle together. My cousin, who worked at the casino, would come home around midnight or 1 a.m. This night, as she pulled up and was walking towards the house, she looked in the window and saw me sitting at the table. my uncle was sitting across from me, but someone was standing to the left of me and someone else was standing in the corner, so she continued to walk in the house and think nothing of it. She got in and said her hellos, put her stuff away, and came and joined us at the table. As we were sitting there talking, she looked at me and asked who was standing next to me a few minutes ago and who was in the corner. I told her that no one had been standing there, and she just said, "Yeah, there was definitely someone standing next to you. It looked like our mom, and she was playing with your hair." I have long hair, which I used to wear down all the time. She said this person was running her hand on my hair like a mother does to a child. It kind of freaked me out, being I was probably only 12 or 13 at the time. My cousin swears up and down that someone was standing over me, rubbing my head and watching me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle, and then there was another person standing behind that person. We got around to thinking that it was probably her mom that she saw. She passed away on her birthday a week before Christmas back in '92. In my family, we consider our aunts and uncles to be just like our moms and dads. After thinking that it could have been her, it didn't scare me so much. However, we couldn't figure out who the person was that was standing in the corner. And always around Christmas time, something strange happens. But we just like to think it's her visiting us. My parents and I lived in a small home that was around 90 years old. It was in a small town called Bluffton in northeast Indiana. The year would have been 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time that I was 19. From the very day that we moved in, I felt like I was not alone. At night I would lie in bed with the intense feeling that I was being watched. One year around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature dropped substantially. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left, and she and I were both terrified. We ran upstairs and lay down on my bed. My white cat curled up to us and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend, and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. She never spent the night over again. Years passed and things were uneventful. I became severely ill with a chronic illness and was frequently hospitalized. That's when the strange things began. After coming near death twice, I began to be able to sense things that no one else seemed to be able to. I once again felt that nagging sensation of being watched. I ignored it this time, and the illness went into remission. Once again, the activity, if you could call it that, stopped. When I was 18, I began to experience things like never before. Upon the death of my beloved grandfather, I had become preoccupied with death and frequently visited cemeteries. That's where I noticed an increase in the activity. It started out with voices. It was like a television had been turned on and there was a flurry of voices coming from downstairs, or even more frightening, outside my room. My parents were always asleep when this would happen, and their room was right next to mine with a vent, so I could hear my parents sleeping next door. I would get up and check all the rooms, but there was no TV on. Nothing to account for the voices. I was getting more and more scared as the voices started happening every night. That's when I started seeing shadow figures. They varied in size, but they were always human-shaped. Except for one. One night, I was walking out of my room with my cat in my arms, when she began to growl ferociously. I have to say, she never does this. She's normally an extremely docile cat, and I was shocked to see her acting in such a way. That's when I looked down the hall and saw a shadow the size of a large dog run down the hall at us. We don't own a dog. We had owned one before I became ill, but were forced to give it away due to the fact that we could no longer provide it with the proper care that it deserved. My cat growled and growled until the shadow finally disappeared. For all the other times that I saw shadow figures, they never took the form of a dog again. From that point on, the shadow figures were strictly human-shaped. Some tall, some child-sized, but they frightened me to death. I would lie in my bed at night, tortured by the fear that I was going insane because no one else was experiencing this. When I confessed my experiences to my parents, they took me to a psychiatrist who could find nothing wrong with me. I continued seeing the shadow figures up until the last few months that we lived there. As the months went on, I began feeling a dark aura spreading around the place. It was a heaviness, an uncomfortable feeling I could never quite shake. Sometimes I would get frustrated with whatever was there. I would leave a room and turn off the light, The light switch would make an audible click every time someone turned it on or off. Each time I would shut it off, the click would echo, and I would turn around and the light would be back on again. Finally, I had enough and said in an annoyed voice, "Quit playing games. Could you just shut the light off, please?" And sure enough, right before my eyes, the light shut off. One time I shut the light in my bedroom before I left the house, and when my parents came back home, my dad said to me, "What did I tell you about leaving your light on?" And I replied, shocked, "But I shut it off when I left." He had nothing to say about that. Another time I was lying in bed when I heard the audible noise of something sitting down on my desk chair. Sure enough, when I sat up, there was a visible imprint in the center of the chair where someone would have been sitting. Things would get so bad sometimes that I would be forced to sleep in my parents' bedroom like I was a child. In August 2008, we moved to a new house far away from the old one. I haven't experienced anything abnormal here, and the aura is much lighter. Perhaps it was my dabbling in the paranormal. I had often tried communicating with spirits and frequented cemeteries to try and provoke ghosts. Maybe that was what had caused all the grief in that house. But one night, I went back there to get some of my things, and as I was leaving, I saw a dark figure run across the yard. I drove away, and I never looked back. So this happened around Christmas time a few years ago. I had taken my 5-year-old niece to the mall to get her a picture taken with Santa. While we were in the line, I noticed a little old man and lady sitting on a bench watching the kids see Santa. The old man came up to us and told my niece that she looked very cute. I told him thank you and he went back to sit on the bench with his wife. We got the picture taken, and I've been waiting for a while for the picture to be printed. I asked the photographer why our picture hadn't been printed yet. He told me that my mother had already gotten the picture and pointed at a little old lady who had been watching us in line before. I went to the old man and, presumably, his wife, and told them to give me the picture back. The old man seemed embarrassed and told me that his wife grabbed our picture by accident and that she had meant to take their granddaughter's picture. He apologized, but I had this weird gut feeling that something was off about them. Next, I took my niece to the merry-go-round, and like magic, the old people were there too, still without any kids. The lady waved at my niece and smiled a big toothless smile at us. At this point, I decided it was best if we left the mall. I took my niece to get lunch at our favorite restaurant that's almost all the way across town from the mall. I felt much more relaxed as we had lunch, completely forgetting about those weird old people from before. As we were driving home, my niece spotted a playground that's close to a much different, smaller mall. She begged me to stop at the playground. There was a young man there with a little boy on the swing, so we weren't alone. Another car pulled into the parking lot shortly after we got there. We played for a little while, when I noticed that no one had gotten out of the car. I looked at the driver's side of the car, and sure enough, it was the same old people. They had followed us from the mall, to the restaurant, and then back to this playground. The man was staring straight at me and my niece, like he was hunting us. I noticed that he had his arm down and was moving it up and down, and then it clicked. He was masturbating in his car. I didn't want to scare my niece, so I subtly alerted the young man who was also at the park. I got my niece into the car quickly and drove into this mall's parking lot to call the cops and the mall security. I didn't want to stick around long enough for my niece to see this man getting arrested, so I gave the cops my number and left to my dad's work, where I figured we would be safe in case the old people followed us again. The cops called back a few hours later and told me that by the time they'd gotten there, the couple was gone, but they were looking for the description of the car that I gave them. It makes me physically sick every time I think about the fact that these old people are out and about and seem totally harmless when they're actually pervert sex offenders, or even worse, kidnappers. So, this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas, and my parents had got me my own personal phone, with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before cell phones were big. I had given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m., and I had been sleeping when my phone suddenly begins to ring. I thought, that's odd, who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So, I answered it, but all that I could hear was breathing on the other end. I just laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time, I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing. Just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told them to stop calling me, and then I hung up. I laid down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the third time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny. I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning. Stop calling me." This time there was a reply. It was a man's voice. It sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what had happened, and she woke up my dad and made me tell him everything. They both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything. He makes sure all the locks on the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke, and that everything will be fine, and he tells me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep, until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, and I open my blinds to my window that leads to the backyard. I notice on this very frosty morning that there are handprints all over my window. I called my parents and they're totally freaked out, and my dad immediately called the police. The police came out to take a report and look at the evidence, and they decided they went to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house, through the back of my window, back to the door, and back to the front door. The police think the guy had tried to get into the house.
Portis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's stories are especially dark, given the sensitive nature of the topic, and I strongly suggest that you proceed with caution. If anyone is having suicidal thoughts, I also recommend you check out the links in the description and call someone. You never know, it might surprise you. And I truly hope that if you're having these thoughts, you get the help you need. Things can and will get better. But for now, please sit back, relax, and let the darkness take control. I've been a firefighter/EMT for a few years now. In my first year, my partner and I got dispatched to a fall. 2 kids fresh out of high school were out hiking and decided to climb a rock face. One of them fell and was impaled by the tree stump. I remember getting to where he was, and his whole body was trembling uncontrollably. I went to work trying to stop the bleeding, as a pool of blood had already formed around the stump, while my partner called dispatch to get a helivac. The kid looked at me and just stuttered out, "Am I gonna die?" I told him I was doing everything I could, and that I needed to keep him talking. He didn't say anything for 30 seconds after that. When he finally did say something, it was, "I don't want to die." This was a kid within a year or two of my age, and he was depending on me and my partner to keep him alive. That was a moment where I was wondering what the hell I was doing in this profession, and if this was something I wanted to continue doing. The kid didn't make it. Helivac wasn't available, and even if it was, he would have bled out before it got there. I ended up in counseling from that call, but I'm still here doing the same job, and I love it. I am a paramedic and have been for about 10 years. My entire career has been spent in emergency medicine, responding to 911 calls and providing advanced life support for life-threatening illness and injuries. The calls we respond to range from inappropriate use of an ambulance to minutes away from death, and oftentimes, it's already too late. I need to forewarn you, this story in particular is going to be dark, and I apologize in advance if there are people that hear this and are affected by the nature of this story. It is going to be graphic, and I'm not going to gloss over any details because the imagery is important. As awful as this story is, I want to make something good come from it. I want to use this story to preach just a little and hope it finds someone somewhere and helps them. I had been working for a couple of years as a paramedic after I graduated from school. The place I worked primarily was in the city, but our service area was the entire county, which is very rural. When you are in school, you go on ride-alongs, you practice your skills with your preceptors and patients, very similar to residency or internships. Your exposure to the job is what gets you while on these ride-alongs. Sometimes you get seriously injured patients and it's terrifying because you sometimes don't always know what to do. You're still learning, but you have your preceptor at your back to protect you from any mess-ups and guide you. Sometimes, though, you don't get lucky enough to experience some of these horrible things. To some, that may seem like a good thing, but it's an important experience as it prepares you for the times when you're alone. There are a couple of terms we use: white cloud and black cloud. White cloud refers to a person, either student or professional, who never gets the exciting serious calls. The calls always seem to come in when you're just getting off the shift, or you just left the area when the call came in. And now another ambulance takes it. And this white cloud can follow the person for any length of time. Black cloud is of course the opposite. When I was in school, I was a white cloud. I got a few cardiac arrests, bad accidents and things like that, but nothing that ever really stood out as unique. So a couple of years into my career, this white cloud is still kind of hanging over me. That's not to say I hadn't had bad calls before, I had, but it's not the same. The day this story takes place is Christmas Eve. I worked from 7 AM Christmas Eve to 7 AM Christmas Day. Now, from what I remember, the day was pretty slow. Most people are with their families, not going outside, getting into accidents or causing mischief. I was working with the charge medic at the time, and a brand new EMT who was going through his field orientation process. A few of my co-workers made a Christmas dinner that day, so we all had hot food to enjoy while we were at work and away from our families. At our station, we had 2 ambulances there, with 2 crews, myself, my partner, and our field orientation process guy, and the other crew. When night comes, if a call comes into our station, the 2 crews just rotate calls so that we get to sleep a little bit more. It was around 11 PM, and I was sitting in the recliner watching TV, when a call came into our station that required us to respond out of the county. One of the guys on the other crew who was a friend of mine was asleep in the recliner next to me, so I took the call. The call was initially for a woman who had fallen and hit her head but was conscious and breathing. Due to the nature of the injury, we responded emergency. It was probably around a 15-minute drive to get to the person's house. As we're getting close, dispatch informs us that the patient is not conscious but breathing. And as we approach the residence driving down the street, where this little development is, there are flashing lights everywhere. Sheriff's deputies, police, fire department, they were all there, with some even blocking the entrance to the street. For just a simple head injury, we thought it was pretty weird, and it set a weird vibe for the call. One of the deputies saw us coming and moved his car to allow us through. Once we got through, this part of the street ended in a cul-de-sac, with houses all around it. People were standing on their front porches, around looking at what was going on. We arrived at the address. There is a vehicle parked in the driveway, still running with officers all around. The driver's side door was open, and there was an officer standing there, looking like he was talking to someone sitting in the driver's seat. I walked up first with my partner, our EMT, and the training guy. As I approached the rear of the vehicle, I see there is definitely someone sitting inside. There is also a man, middle-aged, in plain clothes, standing in front of the vehicle, his lower half hit by the headlights. He has his hands in his pockets and is looking rather intently at the person in the vehicle. I walk up to the officer and get a report from him. While the officer is telling me what's going on, I look at the person in the driver's seat. The person sitting in the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman, maybe in her mid-40s to 50s, sitting back with her head against the headrest, her arms hanging down her side. I can visibly see her breathing, hear her moaning, but not talking. Her eyes are closed. There's a bit of blood running down from her head, past her cheeks, and down to her chin. There is also a small stream of blood coming from her nose. The officer tells me that she was inside with her family when she came out to get something from the car. The officer says the woman's husband, and gestures to the man standing in front of the car, came out to check on her because she was out there for a while. When the husband saw his wife was bleeding, he figured she must have fallen or hit her head on something, so he dialed 911. The officer tells me the woman had not been responding to him. I attempt to speak to the woman, but she doesn't answer. She continues to moan, and I perform a sternum rub to cause painful stimuli and hope to get some sort of reaction, but there isn't one. I ask the husband if she'd been drinking tonight or if she abuses of any drugs that he knows of. He says that she had a few glasses of wine but no drug use. At this point I'm thinking she has a head injury and potentially a brain bleed because she's not responding appropriately. I stand where the officer was standing in the driver's side door as I'm performing my assessment. I can't see where the blood is coming from, so I figure she has a laceration or something in her hair that isn't visible. It's at this time that the officer comes up to me. He says, "We also found this in the driver's side door compartment." He produces a revolver. I look at the officer and look at the revolver. He looks at me and holds it out. I grab it, flip out the cylinder, and at the same time think, oh crap. In the cylinder is one brass casing, with the primer indented, meaning a round had been fired. With this new information and based on the bleeding, I assumed the patient had put the gun to her temple or something. The fact that she is still breathing and making noises led me to assume that she missed, or that the bullet miraculously bounced off if she held it at a weird angle. Due to the potential for significant head trauma, I decide we need to place a cervical collar on the woman in case of spinal injury too. I ask if one of the fire departments can grab a collar out the ambulance. I open the back door of the vehicle and get behind the woman so I can hold her head stable while the fireman places the collar on. It's only when I do this that I see what's really going on. As I slide in behind the patient, I can see the back of her head. Something I will never be able to unsee. Looking at the back of her head, I see a grapefruit-sized hole. With my flashlight, I look at the hole, and it is almost empty, except for a large piece of skull that is floating on the top of a blood and brain soup. I look up, and on the headliner of the vehicle is a 2-foot in diameter halo of blood and brain painted above her, with tiny pieces of skull stuck into the fabric, and I look back at the hole. It's a chilly night, so I can see heat vapors coming from out the hole, similar to how you'd be able to see your breath on a cold day. I look out the vehicle at my partner and say, "We need to go. Now." Either the look on my face or his sense caused him to peek inside the vehicle and see what was coming. His eyes grew wide and he just said, "Holy crap." Our EMT trainee quickly went to the ambulance and grabbed the stretcher and backboard. Up until this point, we were taking our time carefully getting her out of the vehicle, but now, carefully and slowly, turned into just getting her out the vehicle. Our EMT also grabbed a few huge trauma dressings and gorge wraps. I placed the trauma dressing over the hole and wrapped the ever-living crap out of it around her head, so that when we moved her onto the stretcher, nothing would spill out. With the help of the fire department and police, we moved the woman onto the backboard and put her on the stretcher. The whole time, the husband has been standing at the front of the vehicle watching, not understanding what's happened. As we get to the woman on the stretcher, he comes over, and I can see he now has tears on his face. He bends down, kisses her on the cheeks, and says, "I love you." We quickly get the woman in the ambulance. Due to the woman's injury, her cerebellum, the largest part of the brain, is almost completely gone, meaning she has no motor function, no muscle tone, and no cognitive abilities. Her brain stem, however, is still intact. The bullet missed it. The brain stem controls the body's autonomic functions like respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. Due to this, when we moved the woman to the stretcher, her tongue fell against the back of her oral airway, causing a blockage. I knew immediately this was going to happen, so I had my partner set up the intubator supplies for me. In the ambulance, I placed a laryngoscope, a bladed device used in intubation, into the patient's mouth to move her jaw and tongue forward, opening her airway. I see through the hole of the roof of the woman's mouth. I slide the endotracheal tube through the woman's vocal cords into her trachea. This gives us a secured airway so we can ventilate the patient. My patient uses an intraosseous needle to obtain vascular access. Does the same thing as an IV, but it goes into the bone, and medication and fluids are absorbed by the bone marrow. I place the patient onto the cardiac monitor, check her blood pressure and oxygen, and at the time I thought it was the strangest thing. Her blood pressure was actually good. Her heart rate was normal, her oxygen was good, and her cardiac rhythm was normal. We start transporting Emergent to the hospital, and I give them a heads up, activating the trauma team. After the call, we went back to the station to restock the ambulance and clean up. That's when I saw the bits of bone and blood on my pants and shirt. Luckily, the charge medic let me go home and take a shower and put on a new pair of clothes. After I changed, I went back to work, and the rest of the shift was uneventful. I learned that the next morning around 9 a.m., the family had decided to remove life support, and the woman passed away. For many years after that call, I didn't notice a change. I kept doing what I do best, and never really thought I had been affected by it, until I realized I was. A couple of years ago, I had a bad relationship that made me start thinking about myself and how I am. It was something that was always there, but I never really thought about it. I just thought it was my personality, and who I developed into as an adult. I realized how angry I was. I was not a mean person, but very simple, stupid things would set me off, and I had a bad temper. I was very cynical of the world, and still am. And what I thought was a stomach problem, I started thinking maybe it's anxiety. I decided that I wanted to figure out what caused me to be this way, and wanted to figure out why I think the way I do and act the way I do. So I went to see a psychologist. After many months of visiting, my psychologist came up with the PTSD diagnosis. I hated it the first time. I hated being categorized as someone with PTSD. It didn't make sense. I can handle anything, nothing bothers me. But during those visits as we conversed, the one thing that kept coming up was that call. I didn't realize how much it actually affected me. How much of a wall that I built to shut everyone out, to not see who I really am and to protect myself. The more I thought about it, the more I came to realize it probably makes sense. The reason I tell this story the way I do, with the graphic details, is because I think everyone needs to understand it in its entirety. How mental health does not only affect a single person, but everyone around them. Like I said, I'm going to get a little preachy. But this is something that we talk about at work quite a lot. And there are several co-workers on the ambulance, even now, that I talk with about this stuff. One of them, if not number one cause of death in first responders, is suicide. If you are someone who has thought about or attempted suicide in the past, you need to know that taking your life doesn't only affect you. You may think it will be better this way, but I assure you it will not. People often say how selfish suicide is, and it's true, because once you're gone, you have no idea of the amount of lives that have been impacted by you. If you don't think this is true or that no one will care, maybe you need to go back and re-listen to my story, because I guarantee people care. I care. So find someone, anyone, and just talk. Be honest. Get to know them. Tell them how you're feeling. I know it's hard, it was for me. But it does get better. And you have to try. So if anyone you know has or does struggle with mental health issues, reach out. Just be an ear. You don't have to try and solve the problem, but just listen. If you listen, you may hear something that can help save someone's life. And if you struggle with mental health issues and think there is no one for you to talk to, you're wrong. It can be a professional. It can be a person you consider a close friend or relative. If you feel like none of these options work for you, or you are considering doing something dangerous, go to your local emergency room, call 911. That's what we're here for. Police, fire, EMS, ER staff. People may not think of these people to call when you have a mental emergency, but I can tell you firsthand we deal with a lot more than you think, and we are trained in how to deal with people in these situations. All of us. Even if you don't know what to say, even if you just make the call, it will get things started, and hopefully, you can find the help you deserve. There is always someone to talk to. When I got out of high school around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have a steady income and start saving, but this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage cleaner, where a basement flooded with sewage. So after a few days of work, we finished it and moved on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up, and asked if I would be the crew leader supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange, as I had only been working there a total of 3 days, but figured my work ethic was already paying off, and I would get a raise. I only made 10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I got no training in the new position other than a work van with cleaning material, and the phone numbers for the 3 new guys that were also hired to do the fire/water damage cleanup. The boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van, with hazmat suits and respirators, but he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different and that I would get detailed instructions each job. He called my position CSC Crew Leader. The boss told me I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroners would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position, which the boss told me about when I got to the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house who had been laying in a chair. When we arrived, the coroner had come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous, materials that needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the country coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but was fully visible to me and the other guy, and you could smell the rot through the mask as the house had no air conditioning and this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and waiting on additional people to show up to load the body as it was falling apart, and I call it the body because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female, and was trying to not look at it for too long as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and had to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair, the fluids that leaked into the carpet, and the basement where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled onto some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen. The first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had to remove the back of the chair and was putting it on the special hazmat bags that I was given, and the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. No one else was in the same room, as the other guys were in the basement dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could, and when I got it in the bag I got a chill up my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning hit me and pushed on, even though the chill was strange, as I was very hot in full hazmat in June. Next was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it could be cleaned or if we had to remove that section of floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me to just pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out of the basement, tripping over each other, and all 3 ran out. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or a junkie, as Detroit has many issues with these kind of things. I listened at one of the open windows to the basement. It's kind of the first thing we did when we started working, open as many windows as possible, prop the doors open so maybe someone got inside then, or possibly before we got there and was hiding. After listening a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another worker went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there, but there were footprints of the shoe covers we used, but when we started up the stairs we heard a horrible hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it there was nothing, but the corners of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up like someone was moving things very recently, which weirded us both out. We called the guys back, and they got back to the boxes, but all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job, but found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated, as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner, and I clearly remembered it being set next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually, or the basement guys took it for the floor, and I found it sat beside the bag that had the back of the chair. This is impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again I got the chills, but this one was brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. I cleaned the floorboards and moved out trash. Job complete. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we weren't welcome in his home and not to touch his belongings and that we needed to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things and that he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him. Even when he would push me and scream at me, there was no reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile that I had made by the front door, exactly where I had found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of the disease from fluids. They also said it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were sad but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was that they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things in the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me and the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembers is waking up, sad, as if he'd done something wrong, and had a horrible coughing fit, which might have just been a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as related to the other dreams. We all talked about it, and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to a situation, and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it the best I could, and we hoped for better assignments the next day. The next few jobs weren't so bad. Cleaning up blood at a home invasion, no casualties, but a huge mess. And then there were a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade, and were split into 2 different groups that I was responsible to manage as crew leader, so I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first job, but I was wrong. One of our next jobs was the suicide of a man that was middle-aged. The coroner had already removed the body, but it was a mess. The guy had shot himself with what I think was a large caliber handgun or shotgun, as the spray was everywhere in the basement, in like a second living room. There were skull fragments lodged in drywall, brain matter all over, and again, he was not found for a bit, so the smell was horrible. The first step in cleaning this was using our backpack vacuum cleaner to suck up all the biomaterial. The coroner told us when we went in that he and his partner were extremely uneasy in the house. It felt strange, and we immediately started getting a claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when we went into the basement as well. To make matters worse, the family of the man had come over and were crying upstairs, but the vacuum noise helped cancel out that noise. While I was cleaning, the power to the lights went out, and it was completely pitch black. This was strange because my vacuum still worked, and my crewmates started screaming at this point, so I turned off my vacuum and went up. I thought maybe he had touched a wire to the lights, but my vacuum unit was turned off, and he was still screaming, and I could hear things being knocked over. I started fumbling around for my flashlight on my tool belt, and yelled for my friend asking what was going on, but all I got back was panicked screaming, and then I saw in the pitch black something darker that was moving in my direction, and I admit I freaked out. I slipped trying to back up, still looking in my belt for the flashlight, and found it when I hit the basement wall. I turned the light on, aimed at the blackest shape I've ever seen, and when the light turned on, I saw the shape of a man wearing a flannel shirt, beard, and an expression like he was about to attack me. Then it was just gone. My crewmate was behind where the entity was, sitting on the floor, rocking with his hand on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight off the ground, turned it on, and then ran up the stairs outside and threw up. I followed behind him and asked if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I just imagined the entity in the man because his screaming scared me. But he told me that as he was scrubbing the wall, he felt something pulling on him, something in his tool belt, and he thought it was me. But when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was engulfed by what he said was like dark smoke, and immediately couldn't breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to pull his flashlight out, but it was knocked out of his hand like his wrist was grabbed with force, and he managed to scream. When he screamed, trinkets started falling off an entertainment center that was about 3 feet to his side, and the black smoke moved back. But he was close to passing out from exertion. He also said he lost hearing and didn't know that any noise came out when he started screaming, and that the stuff started falling off the shelves and was landing on him, which is why he was covering his head. He said it felt like a weight was lifted off him when the dark smoke backed up, but he felt sick right away, and the light from my flashlight made the sick feeling intensify. We took nearly an hour lunch, where he just sat there pale as ever, and didn't say much, other than he breathed in the smoke and didn't feel right. I got him some Gatorade, and his color started to come back. I never told him I saw a man when I turned my light on, because we still needed to finish, and I didn't want to put that scene in my head, since he never mentioned seeing it. When we went back, the lights in the basement were on again. Half the things that fell from the shelves were back on the entertainment center, and the TV was on baseball, and there was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My worker stayed a half hour, got sick again and went home for the day, leaving me alone to finish the job, which I didn't want to do, but I had to as the other guys had their own job. After cleaning up everything with my vacuum, I began scrubbing the old blood, which is hard after it congeals, mixed in with brain matter, and it's like glue, even with cleaner. While I was finishing up, I kept seeing the shape of a person away in the side of my vision. Each time I would smell that strange burnt hair scent, and a few times I also felt like a force was pulling at items on my belt. Not sure which items, as there were several there. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs, and in the hallway along the way, I heard a muffled cry or moan. I froze up, staying still, thinking maybe a family member had come back, and when I panned around there was nothing. But I saw a picture on the wall of a man with a beard wearing a flannel, and several other pictures in the hallway of other scenarios of the same man in different flannels, with deer or fish or family. I had not seen a picture of that man as I had not been anywhere else in the house, nor did I use the bathroom downstairs because pulling off a hazmat suit is a pain. As I was securing the house, closing all the windows, locking the doors, and shutting down every light but the front porch light, I saw the front curtain move, and again saw the darker than black form in the front window. The last experience I will share happened in mid-July in a very bad area in Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man very badly, and he escaped to his house, where the neighborhood people quickly called the police, and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaging his car. The man was hurt bad by the mob, and was hurt by a rock or glass and then died in the house. This was an assumption by the DPD. From what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding, and the man picked up a girl that was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her, and the people overreacted, and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows, cleaned up blood and bodily fluid, but as soon as I entered the house, I just felt wave after wave of fear and sadness, like I have never felt this before, and it hit waves that made my legs weak. My working buddy, who was there, showed up late, and didn't get the story from the cops like I did, but experienced the same feelings. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around the corners like it was watching us, then hiding, similar to a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like, "Please stop. No." A few times the crowd came back and yelled at the house. And when this was going on, the activity in the house increased, and we could hear running footsteps going up the stairs and a door slam. It sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like from the front door through the living room to the bathroom, to stairs to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas, and each time I would be hit by one of those waves of fear or sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on the porches hanging out, like as usual during summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we loaded the van and took off the hazmat suits. We ignored this, but before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people on the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked, and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob, so we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when I left the house was like night and day. Inside I was anxious, scared and paranoid and just really down, which could be due to knowing the story, but when I got out, I felt like I was flipping a light switch. Immediately I felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff, as normal 19 and 20-year-olds do. I have many more stories of this written down in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working. I spoke to the other guys in the crew, and got the other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed by my subconscious mind to try and cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation, and when I hear other members of my crew tell me their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different colour. When I have time, I will put out the journal and give more experiences, the way the job got worse, and when I started the journal 3 months in, several experiences with what I think was paranormal, and many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity began to slip. In the end, I worked for the place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, all died, 2 from suicide, and 1 from a drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, we were all normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls and parties and working. I watched each of them slowly drain their joys and passions for life. And I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way, most likely so another person wouldn't have to see the horrible things that we all saw far too often. I was an EMT working the 4 AM to 4 PM shift. We pick up our rig and get told to post, hang out and wait for a call in a really crappy part of town. I parked behind this shopping centre where all of the businesses had closed down due to the lack of people around the general area. It was a lot of trailer parks, really run-down apartments and whatnot, and I picked this place because the sun is going to rise in an hour or so, and my partner and I both wanted to take a nap, until a call came through that radioed to us. My partner has no problem sleeping while sitting straight up in front of the ambulance, but I absolutely can't do this. So I went in the back and lied down on the bench trying to nap. The thing about our old ambulance is that you couldn't open the side door from the inside, so I had to get out, go through the side door, not the very back double doors, and I lay down. I left the side door a little bit cracked open for when a call came in so that I could just jump out and respond. But about 5 minutes of me laying there, I hear my partner call me. "Hey dude, you're awake?" "Yeah, why?" "That person over there's been staring at us for a while." Across the street, there was a sidewalk along the side of a park. I could make out a faint shadow of a person. I knew it was someone because their cigarette butt flickered every time they took a puff. The street light was super dim, but I could tell that they were there, just staring at us. It was super weird, so we watched them for a bit, and after about 5 more minutes of us just watching, the person walks away. We joke about how weird people are, being up at 5 AM roaming around some sketchy park, and I lay back down and begin dozing off. I wake up to my partner yelling, "Holy crap, dude!" So I pop my head up into the front cabin. The person was standing about 20 feet from our ambulance, dressed in all black, just staring at him, eyes locked. I look at her face and I kid you not, she looked like the girl from The Ring. She had pitch black straight hair, wearing all black, very light skinned, and the street light made her look like she was as white as paper. My partner is absolutely terrified, as they've entered some sort of weird staring match, and I told him to hop over into the driver's seat and to get the hell out of there. He says that he couldn't. He's too scared to move. Crap. I guess I have to squeeze back from the back through this little space to get into the driver's seat. I jump up and try and get back into the front cabin. It's a tight squeeze because I'm a bigger guy, but I make it through, and she apparently takes note of me moving and begins power walking straight to us. I've never been so freaked out in my life. As she gets super close, I realize she's looking at the side door that I left cracked a little bit, and I'm thinking, I forgot to close it. I get a good look at her. She noticed the door, and I think she's gonna try and get in. Is she gonna try and kill us? I don't know, but I've got to get out of there. Her whole body is shaking as she gets closer and closer, still staring at my partner. She gets up right next to the window and just stares at us both. I get into the front, with about 1 second to spare, start the ambulance and peel out of there. And we never posted there again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. They were indeed very dark. Well, if any of you are thinking of suicide, I strongly suggest against it and would implore you to seek help. It really does make a difference. Please, please get help. Obviously, as you've heard in the story, it doesn't just impact you, it impacts everyone in more ways than you could possibly imagine. So please, don't do it. So I'm just going to leave that there. Links to some suicide hotlines are down in the description. So please, if this is you, check it out. Maybe this is your sign to do something about it. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my wonderful members and patrons who make videos like this possible by helping support and run the channel. Really does mean a lot. Thank you guys. My voice is going really hoarse now. It was, I don't know why. It's still quite early in the day. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure narrating for you tonight, but I think it's time for some happy stuff. So for now, stay awesome, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.